Hi, I'm Stephan, Director MSSP Americas for Fortinet. I help businesses secure their critical infrastructure and private information through the use of advanced intelligence, threat intelligence, as well as managed security services. I have an opportunity to work with some of the world-class service providers today, like Hawaiian and Telcom, to build solutions that help protect their clients against malware and advanced persistent threats. So what are we going to talk about today? I call this the Lions and Tigers and Bears presentation. So what we're going to cover today is the threat landscape, security trends, and the recent exploits that you may have seen in the news and some of more detail on exactly what happened there, along with what you can do to help defend your environment personally and as a business perspective. So first, let's zoom out to about 20,000 feet and get a perspective on where these security exploits are coming from. A lot of us think that maybe the majority of this stuff is coming from hackers, in a dark room somewhere with ill intent to take your credit card numbers. But the fact of the matter is it's spread about into three pretty much even segments of where these exploits are occurring. So what we're seeing is obviously you've got patches and issues with software like Windows and things like that where security vulnerabilities and exploits are created based on a software patch or lack of patch. This is a good piece of what's happening today. The human factor is another big one, and obviously training your people to not do stupid things is kind of a good thing to include in your security proposal and your security plan moving forward. That's a big one, but what we're going to cover today is we're going to cover the malicious intent. So obviously there are certain things that we can do to protect ourselves. The top two are the ones that we can really do something about. Obviously we can complain to Microsoft and VMware about different issues that are created by the patching stuff, but we're going to talk about what we can actually do to affect the security environment and secure our businesses. So first let's look at how much each of these different types of breaches cost, what they cost from a per capita perspective. One of the things that I find interesting is a lot of folks will say, oh, you know, security, no big deal, nobody's coming after my business. That's fine if you want to look at it like that, but you can also look at it like a taxpayer because that $157 per capita is on us as taxpayers. We're paying that. So it's time for us to start thinking about security as a taxpayer would, as a stockholder, if you will, in this country, because these are very expensive exploits and they do end up costing us as taxpayers. $157 per exploit is a pretty substantial amount of money if you consider that many of these organizations house hundreds of thousands of records. So you can see where some of these things could turn into real problems, like you saw the Target CEO stepping aside due to the recent outbreak there. So these are affecting businesses on a daily basis, and these are expensive exploits. And you can see the system glitches are the secondary. There's a lot of informatics around that, why that's more expensive, and it generally has to do with the cost of actually updating and dealing with issues on the platforms. And then the human factor, another big one, right? Taking your laptop along and leaving it behind in the cab. I mean, there's all kinds of metrics around when this happens. USB drives, cell phones being left behind. This is obviously a big part of that. So who's doing the hacking and why? Good thing to understand is the attack vectors and the reasons that they're doing this. For the most part, organized crime makes up the majority of the folks that are breaking into networks today. So it's important for us to consider where these folks are coming from, what they're doing to break into our networks and why. Romania, Eastern Europe, Russians. I had a chance to sit down with the Senior Vice President of Cyber-security for AT&T a couple weeks back, and I said, you know, Ed, who concerns you the most from a cyber terrorism perspective? He said the Russians. They're really, really good at breaking into networks. So good to know who's coming at us from this perspective. A lot of folks think the Chinese, the North Koreans are really a big problem, which they are, but organized crime is by far the most motivated batch of hackers that we have out there facing our networks today. So secondary comes in the state affiliated, and these are state-sponsored cyber criminals, basically looking for either espionage perspective, trying to steal information to basically short-circuit their research and development cycle. I've got tons of examples of oil companies that have suffered from state-sponsored exploits. Angular drilling technology that was created in the United States by American oil companies immediately appears off the coast of China with a huge R&D cycle created on our side to create that technology, and then bang, they're right off the coast of China here without that R&D cycle, and we know why that is the case. Obviously, a lot of benefit to stealing this information as opposed to doing it and developing it yourself. A lot less expensive to do it that way. So as we see this stuff, we're seeing the manufacturing, pro services, transportation, oil, energy type vectors being targeted on a consistent, advanced, persistent threat basis. So good to know where that's coming from. Everybody thinks that Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks are a big part of the security outbreak issues out there, but the fact of the matter is they're really only about 2% of the overall problem that we're facing today. So how are they doing it? Malware is huge, right? So you're going to hear malware mentioned a lot. Application-based threats, malware, advanced persistent threats. Malware is by far one of the biggest problems that we've faced as users of the internet. It comes to us in so many different fashions, but it constitutes 40% of the total breaches that occur out there today, so it's a big problem. So what you're seeing here is that the number one attack that's being utilized here is the good old keyboard logger. And if you're not familiar with that is, basically the keyboard logger will sit there and track everything that you do. So Citadel, some of these other exploits that came out, what they're doing is they're loading malware onto your machine that will then track and send email of everything that you type with your keyboard. What they're looking for is username, passwords, information like that, that give them the ability to break into accounts and steal information, steal identities. So the good old keyboard logger has been around for a long, long time, but like the denial of service type attacks that have been around for a lot of years, they're tried and true and they work, so they're being used over and over again. So 34% are email attachments. So interestingly enough, you'd figure that antivirus might help you with this. Not so much. Antivirus is completely ineffective, and we'll show you why that is as we move forward. But email attachments, break down into some of the human training that we can provide. If it looks goofy, if they're offering something that sounds too good to be true, chances are it is too good to be true. Don't open the file. But CryptoLocker and some of the crazy stuff that's been coming out in 2013 were embedded in email as attachments. And we'll talk about some exploits, specifically what they were and how they worked. Brute force attacks, another really big part of that segment, right? 26% of total outbreaks are because somebody had a weak password. This is another piece of that human factor that we have to take into account. Is password 1 and ABC123 and my dog's name +1, those are not good passwords, and this is something that obviously as an end user, I know how hard it is to track multiple passwords, but the fact of the matter is that the password protection is a huge part of securing an environment. And you see this as being a threat vector for us as well. So who are the victims? Everybody thinks that they're a victim of this, and more and more so today, businesses that traditionally haven't been targets and haven't really seen their networks get attacked, that is changing diametrically now. So we're seeing a big shift in all businesses being attacked, and we'll talk a little bit more about the actual details of what businesses are getting exploited. But retail is basically, it's the shiny carrot. It is an environment that houses credit card information, personal information, a variety of different things. And retail tends to be, anybody here in the retail business? Okay, well I won't talk too badly about retail, but traditionally retail folks have been very hesitant to spend money on security. They really want to focus their efforts on doing business in whatever capacity that is. So security is a tough spend for them. The problem is that creates an excellent environment for hackers, and hackers basically break into small business retail organizations and they siphon out information in small batches so that they're not noticed. And the reason that they do the small business over the bigger businesses is because the small businesses generally are underdefended and they generally are understaffed from a security perspective. So it's a real threat, a real issue for them to be actually able to be aware of the fact that they've been exploited. So the hackers enjoy this. They can sit there and siphon out small amounts of credit cards before anybody notices. The problem is that the FBI oftentimes will be the ones that notice and notify that retail organization that they've been exploited, and then they've got all kinds of problems to deal with from a PCI perspective, et cetera. Manufacturing as well. So again, trying to get around the whole R&D cycle of creating cool stuff like we do here in this country, and being able to short circuit their go-to-market plan by not having to develop this stuff themselves. So it's another big victim is the folks that make cool stuff. Whether that's drilling technology or manufacturing processes or you name it. Pretty much if you're making cool things, somebody's going to want to steal it. Information services as well, another part of that, right? So everything from DNS exploits and break-ins to Amazon Web Services and Google Gmail and all these different types of information services that are being hosted, another big target for hackers. So let's talk about the cost per record. I think this is a very valid slide to put up there. Figure out where you are in this picture, and you can pretty much figure out what it's going to cost you if you get breached. And then figure out how many records you have that could potentially be breached, and you can see what the net cost is going to be for you if you are a victim of an exploit. So obviously the top two being the healthcare and the finance environments, lots of things to protect. Healthcare obviously houses information that includes our credit card numbers and our private information. The financial companies are protecting, financial data, right? So it's a ton of stuff that's very important and very valuable. So for them to be exploited, it's a very costly prospect for them to have to deal with in a follow-on perspective. So they're dealing with having to cover you for your credit reporting for years, for having to notify the states that they operate in that they've been breached. So it can be a very costly endeavor for these businesses, but you can pretty much figure out where you sit in this picture. Another slide that I think is important for us to consider is, obviously we can sit there and go, okay, well, it costs me X amount of money if I'm breached. Well, one of the biggest factors that in talking to businesses is customer churn is a huge, huge issue for them. So I was working with a telecommunications company, and they really prided themselves on having a 3% churn rate. So they were really happy that 3% was the amount of customers that would leave them for a variety of different reasons. Well, if you look here on the United States, the number there, it's close to 3% is the net result of lost customers following an exploit. So this really digs home whenever you think about your customers are your most greatest asset. So if you're trying to keep from losing them, securing your environment is a big part of it. We don't want to be in France, because in France it's like sacre bleu, we're out of here, right? So they're going to another company after that. Luckily, our folks seem to be a little bit more patient, but still 3% is 3%, and it's not something we want to see showing up. All right, let's transition here into the security trends, right? So the security environment is constantly changing, and one of the most difficult things that I hear from businesses that I consult to is, how do I keep up with this stuff? Every single week there's some new exploit that comes out. I mean, it's a real problem keeping up with this stuff. So what we've found is security is becoming a utility. So much like we don't pot our own water or burn coal to create electricity, security has become so complex and subtle that businesses are just looking to experts to do this for them. So what's happening is more and more businesses are turning to managed security service providers, often those that are providing network to them because it makes sense to get your security with a network, and they're basically outsourcing this stuff. Where traditionally you'd had to pull the firewall out of their dead clenched fist to get to do their security. These days it's like, wow, I don't want to deal with this anymore. And what businesses are doing, large and small, is they're trying to migrate this risk out of their network and into the hands of specialized operators that know what they're doing. They realize they can't keep up with it. Nobody wants to be a security expert. Nobody wants to buy security, to be honest with you. It's done because you have to. So having it done somewhere else in a cost-effective manner is the way that this market is trending. Cloud migration across verticals is a reality. I remember a year ago you couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting somebody that's mentioning a cloud this, cloud that. Ryan gave a great presentation that puts this into a little bit better perspective. But cloud migration is happening across all of our verticals today. So what we're seeing is businesses are starting to look at reducing their total cost of IT. So they're looking at IT as a service as being a way to reduce their overall cost. This is a result of the actual security environmentals. It's a result of the economic situation that's out there today. So businesses are looking at this as a way to reduce their cost. And I would throw this up for a question to the group. Do you think it is easier to secure a bunch of disparate offices around the islands, or do you think it would be easier to defend a cloud? So those of you that think it's easier to defend disparate offices around the island, raise your hand. Oh, wow, okay. Either I put everybody to sleep or everybody's on par with me here. So securing a cloud environment, while there's all of these risks and security issues to deal with, you're better off securing a single point than you are trying to defend a bunch of different endpoints. So a lot of businesses are kind of seeing this. So what you're seeing is a migration to security as a service, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Another thing to keep in mind is the firewall and antivirus just doesn't work anymore. So traditionally, a firewall would protect us from the bad guys. It's the security guard at the front door. It's the traffic cop, if you will. You load up antivirus onto your desktop and your servers, you're good to go. Don't worry about it. Well, that's gone. So those days are over. The fact of the matter is this stuff doesn't work anymore. And what's happening now is businesses are turning to unified threat management, which we'll explain later, but is pretty much a set of controls that provide you an ability to pull out the security requirement that you may have for specific engagements and not have to go out and buy a bunch of different vendors to do the same thing. So advanced persistent threats are a reality. Advanced persistent threats basically is somebody coming after you and they don't stop coming after you and they keep coming after you. That is a fact of life today. Small businesses, we'll see why they're a target. We mentioned it a little bit, but you'd be surprised at the statistics around this. The folks that thought that they were clear and there's nobody that's coming after me, that is not the case today. So phishing and some of these really whacked security exploits are targeted around advanced persistent threats. If this doesn't work, I'm going to try this. If that doesn't work, I'm going to try this. So they don't go away, and they continue to try and break into your network. So just to drill down on the old ways are not working anymore, the real problem that we face here is these increased levels of blended threats out there. So it's not just a worm that's embedded in an email. It's a browser-based window that you go to that downloads a little malware applet that you don't even see loading up. So these traditional methods of defending yourself just don't work. Your firewalls are designed to allow web traffic. I mean, that's what they do. They say, hey, Bob's going out to the internet. Okay, Bob, you can go, but the other guy trying to come in can't. But anything coming back to Bob is allowed. That old method does not work anymore, especially whenever you're thinking about web-based threats, as they are the new threat that's out there today. They're taking advantage of this firewall situation. The traditional standard, stateful packet inspection firewall just isn't cutting it. So as I mentioned, advanced persistent threats is huge, a 42% increase in targeted attacks in 2013. Well, that is massive. That's a big, huge increase in folks that are coming after you, and they're not going to stop coming after you. So really a big change in this perspective. So also, all verticals are under attack. Traditionally, if I was a hacker, let's say I started hacking 5 years ago, I'd go after the banks, I'd go after the big businesses, I'd go where the money's at. Well, now the money's at the small businesses. It's the biggest growing segment of our economy. So those hackers are actually going after small businesses because, like I said, the small businesses defend themselves less well, they have less of a budget to do this, and they don't notice it when they've been broken into. I don't know if anybody's ever seen those panel vans driving around town that sell you these speakers really cheap. Well, the fact of the matter is they generally steal those speakers and they sell them out of panel vans, and you get a really good deal because they're trying to loosen them up in small increments so that they're not noticed. The cops don't really get into it. RICO doesn't really care about it. So it's in small enough number that there isn't a lot of reaction to it. And that's the same effect that's happening in small businesses. They don't notice it, so they continue to do it in small amounts. But every credit card stolen from a small business is enough to potentially put them out of business. 78% of small businesses, retail-oriented small businesses that are exploited, are out of business within 18 months. That's a scary metric because for me, I'm a big fan of the small business. I came out of that environment. And to think that we'd be sending everybody home after 18 months of getting broken into is a real heartbreaker. All right, so all of this craziness, all the lions and tigers and bears out there are pushing folks to manage security services. So like I mentioned, nobody wants to do this anymore. It's just gotten too hard. If you're making shoes, you're selling lays, whatever you're doing as a business, you want to do that. You don't want to be a security rocket scientist, and you may have a handful of folks that are actually responsible for security in your network, but what do? Do you send them to school every other week? If they're in school every other week, how are they doing what they need to be doing to help your business from a strategic perspective? So what's happening out there is businesses are moving this risk out of their network and over to specialized providers. They're looking to have specialized businesses do this in a hardware and an engineering and a software inclusive capacity. And they're looking at this as like, hey, I can get this in the cloud. Well, why can't I get my managed security services in such a way? Well, you can. And we'll talk about how NTSB does that for you, and Hawaiian Telcom can be an excellent source for this type of solution. But it's a massive market change. So it's a big, huge market shift. I remember selling security into healthcare a lot of years ago, and they didn't want anybody touching their firewall. They didn't want anybody looking at it. That has changed just hugely right now. So healthcare-oriented businesses are realizing this is so hard to do that even if they have security people on staff, that they will outsource, maybe not all of it, but components of it, and they'll certainly want to get the hardware in some sort of a monthly recurring fashion because nobody wants to buy gear that they have to sell 3 years down the road on eBay. So another one of the metrics that you see changing here and causing this managed security service shift is the fact that the lifespan of a firewall is reducing. It used to be 3 to 5 years was a pretty good average. You went out and bought a Cisco Pix, you could count on it for 3 to 5 years before you had to swap it out for something that would do more things or do it in a higher performance capacity. Now that the security environment changes so fast and the network speeds are increasing so dramatically, your lifespan on firewalls is like 2 years now. Anybody here want to buy a firewall every 2 years? Raise your hand. I got a sales guy outside that wants to talk to you. So fact of the matter is you can't keep up with this, right? So you can't constantly be dealing with hardware obsolescence. It's just too hard to deal with. So the hardware inclusive service is wildly popular as a means of getting around this issue of hardware obsolescence and constantly replacing hardware. Market dynamics are shifting as well. So right now, today, if you look at the metrics and the amount of money being spent on managed security services, the enterprise spend more than any other business segment. That is going to be changing in the next 5 years. So what you're going to see is the small to medium enterprise, about 500 users and downward, are going to be the biggest consumers of managed security services. They will be over 50% of the total market moving forward. So managed services are moving into the SMB space. It's becoming more affordable for managed services to be deliverable and consumed by a smaller business. So they're really jumping on board, and they're doing it with their telecommunications company. So nobody wants to have two different sales cycles for security and network. It makes a lot of sense that when you're upgrading your network, you should be upgrading your firewalls and your security infrastructure at the same time. And hey, if you can have some smart guy or gal do this for you so that you don't have to mess with it, and they've checked all the certification boxes and they're putting a good solution in place for you, why not? So that's what we're seeing now as this shift continues to expand in the smaller businesses. Another thing is I told you about the dead cat being swung around, right? So the cloud stuff is here. It's happening. It's now. I remember back 5 years ago, we were in the VoIP business, securing VoIP, and we was like, oh, this is the year. VoIP is going to hit it big this year. We waited around for a couple years before we even saw anything selling. The fact of the matter is the cloud is very real. It is now. It is a huge business. It is something to be looking at from the perspective of any business size, whether it's compute, store, network, whatever you're looking at. The cloud is a good environment. Infrastructure as a service, security as a service is just a very cost-effective way to do things. So businesses are moving in this direction, and this will constitute the majority of the market share over the next 5 years. CPE, or premise-based, the firewall that sits on your site, has traditionally been the biggest part of this market. So we've made a lot of money at Fortinet working with partners that make a lot of money going out there and installing firewalls and managing for our customers. But this business is going to start to wane as more and more cloud adoption occurs. So we're seeing this all over the place, and cloud is going to be a big thing to consider as you move forward. Security as a service offers the same benefits that infrastructure as a service provides. Elasticity, right? I can scale up and scale down as needed. And literally having security built into a cloud environment to defend all your stuff gives you that single point to secure. It gives you an ability to secure everything in one place as opposed to trying to secure it at different disparate offices. And it lets you grow and shrink as needed as opposed to having to deal with a firewall like, oh shoot, I got to go back and replace that. As David had mentioned about the voice over IP system, it's the same with security. You don't want to have to swap out a firewall after you maybe acquire a company or you've added a bunch of employees because things are going well, or things aren't going so well and you've lost some people and you want to ratchet down. Security in the cloud is a way for you to achieve these ends without having to go out and spend a bunch of money. All right, so let's talk about some recent exploits. Obviously, one of the things that we find interesting, so just so you know, threat intelligence is a big part of this. And if you listen to some of the other presentations, HP ArcSight's a great partner of ours. Security information and event management is different than managed security services, but it's as crucial and as important because threat intelligence is key. Being able to know what's coming at you is part of defending against it. You don't want to be in a situation where you're bringing a knife to a gunfight, right? So in this situation, what you're seeing here is over time, we have about 450 or so threat researchers that sit in Vancouver, Canada, and all they do is sit in their darkened room and look for bad things that are happening, and then they update our firmware and our operating systems to meet these threats. So the CryptoLocker threat, some of these other exploits that you saw out there did not affect Fortinet customers because our threat researchers are watching this, they're using the threat intelligence they see, and they're updating these boxes. So every time something like this happens, even if it's a zero-day threat, if we see it happen, we can do something about it, and we update the entire planet. We have millions of FortiGates deployed all over the world, and literally all of those boxes are getting updated all at once. So if you were a Fortinet person at that time, if you were a Fortinet customer at that time, you didn't fall victim to CryptoLocker. So you were getting your money's worth there. But let's look at the timeline. So this is pretty scary, right? So has anybody heard about the Citadel botnet? So the Citadel botnet was basically, it would infect your machine, your grandma's machine. It'd come awake at night in the middle of the night and it'd go attack a bank. And it's looking for different specific information that a bank would house. So it was specifically designed to break into financial institutions. So it would use perfectly good machines. These machines would look and act normal until they wake up in the middle of the night like a zombie and they go out and attack things. Your grandma's in bed, she doesn't even see it happen. The machine boots up, it goes and does bad things, and it boots back down again. And the next day she's having a video conference, with her grandchildren again. So the botnet, Citadel botnet was a big problem. It cost millions and millions of dollars and affected a lot of businesses. So this was a particular malware exploit that was basically housed within a web page. So it downloaded from a web page. Pretty scary. So if you think about that, a lot of times that you were going to a page you thought you were going to, but in actuality, NBC was an excellent example of this. So you were going to NBC, but you actually weren't going to the real NBC. You were going to a website that looked just like NBC, and then whenever you hit that page, in the background, you were downloading Citadel. So scary stuff. Traditional firewalls aren't going to help you there. So the South Korean SD wiper was pretty sweet too. So that one would just wipe out your entire hard drive. Not sure what the whole plan there. Somebody was in a really bad mood when they wrote that. You'd figure they'd be trying to make money somehow, but not so much. But literally, you've got a variety of these threats that are pretty scary. And something to notice here down here at the bottom. While this is all happening, you look at maybe 79 million PCs that are shipping out there. Look at the number of smartphones that are shipping at the same time. 216 million smartphones. So as all of this is happening and folks are breaking into different types of environments and they're causing all kinds of ruckus and mayhem, the fact of the matter is that we are having this massive explosion of smartphones that are all just like the computers that we run on. I don't even use a laptop anymore. So this is everybody. Everybody's doing this. So how well do we defend these devices? How well am I defended right now, jumping on the Wi-Fi here? So look at the threat environment that's evolving down here. New threats are being written for mobility users on a daily basis. And they're doing really crazy things like ransomware. They're stealing your stuff. Does anybody watch Person of Interest? I love that show. I mean, in the security business, there's nothing scarier than having somebody hot mic your phone and listen to your conversation. So this is real. I mean, they're using tools and exploits in this show that are very real. The CIA has been using them for years. Now it's on TV, and now we all know about it. But this is the kind of threat that you have to take into mind whenever you're running around with a smartphone that can do everything but wash the car. So keep this stuff in mind. The fake defender, oh man, I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to go download some security software for my smartphone. Well, fake defender go, hey, we'll lock you up tighter than a bug's butt. Download my stuff, right? And you download it from Google. You figure Google Play is checking these things out. Not so much, right? So fake defender was a big problem, right? 30 minutes. Oh, I'm getting the wrap it up light back there. Okay. All right, so let's get rocking here. One of the scariest exploits that I found from this, other than CryptoLocker, that's pretty scary. We'll get into that in a minute. One of the scariest threats that I find is bad BIOS and air gap. Bad BIOS basically comes to you in a USB stick. It transmits itself in that USB stick and it's embedded in hardware. So even if you scan the USB stick and you run all kinds of different diagnostics, you don't see it, it doesn't appear. You put that into another computer and immediately that computer's infected. One of the guys that we worked with on this particular exploit, he had uninstalled the operating system, completely reinstalled the operating system, and was immediately reinfected because it was built into his BIOS. So without getting all propeller head on you, the BIOS is the underlying ground set for any type of operating system to load onto. And the bad BIOS basically made it to where it didn't matter what you did. Every time you reloaded the software and the operating system on there, it would change the registry settings to make sure that you could not wipe it out. It would also disable your security settings. Now the air gap theory, this one's really spooky, right? So what this guy did that discovered the bad BIOS threat, what he did was he's like, okay, I'm going to take this thing off the network. I'm not going to let it connect to anything. I'm not even going to put my USB drive in this thing. I got to make sure this thing is secure. What he found was it got infected anyway. Without any of these exploits, it was a brand new machine. It hadn't been infected before. What he hypothesized was the computers were talking to each other using the microphone and the speaker in very high frequency audio signals. So anybody ever heard of Kevin Mitnick? He's a guy that broke in and stole artificial intelligence from UCSD. So the FBI, whenever they caught this guy, wouldn't let him use a phone because they thought he could talk to computers. So he'd get on there and go, you know, and he'd be talking to computers. So that was real, though. I mean, he could do that. And the fact of the matter is somebody read his book because they're doing it now. And this is a huge problem, right? I mean, think about SCADA systems that are running oil and gas businesses, the environmental and operational controls. They don't let them touch a network for the security issues, but they got microphones and speakers. So how secure are you in that environment? So that's obviously really scary. So all kinds of bad stuff breaking out here. And then down on the bottom, as we tracked into the second half of 2013, we saw folks making money off of this. So literally, you could go download Mobile Rat, right? So that sounds like a nice program everybody should have, right? So Mobile Rat basically was a way for you to break into mobile devices. It helped you install malware. It helped you create programs that you could put up onto Google Play to where Google Play would look at it, good to go. All right, so the fact of the matter is all these changing threats create this massive issue, and it was Paul Kruger that did it too. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. So literally, the devices are 4 to 5 to 10x the number of units shipped than PCs. People aren't buying PCs anymore. They're buying these mobile devices. And nobody is really thinking about the security perspective from this advantage. So 81% of the market share for Google Droids. How many of y'all have iPhones? Good for you. How many of y'all have Droids? Yeah, me too. So, sorry, the fact of the matter is they're coming after us. And then, namely, it's because Apple basically has got a very difficult environment to write into, and Google Android basically makes it to where you can write cool programs. Oftentimes, they're not so cool, right? All right, so CryptoLocker also happened in this particular time. Let's talk about the target exploit, right? So a CEO loses his job over a hacking exploit. I'd hate to say it, but we're going to see more of this. If you're the CEO of a company and you're not doing something about the security of your environment, you are going to be held culpable for this, right? And somebody is going to eventually go, why didn't we find this to be more of a priority? Why didn't we defend ourselves? Because Black POS, the program that basically exploited the target systems, hundreds of thousands of machines, was something that malware defense would have protected you against. If they had been a Fortinet customer, they wouldn't be in this situation. That guy'd still have his job. So the fact of the matter is a 17-year-old Russian hacker wrote this program, and he sold it to a variety of different criminal organizations that used it, $1,800 a pop. So that's one wealthy 17-year-old Russian kid out there making a ton of money off of this particular exploit. He didn't do the hacking. The criminal organizations that targeted Target were the ones that did the hacking. So this sinks home for me. I spend tons of money at Target. So does my wife and kids. I mean, I've trotted Target wear around all over the place. So as soon as I saw this come out, I'm like, honey, we got to change the credit card numbers and the debit card numbers. So this affects everybody, right? So this is why this got into the news and why it became such a big problem. 40 million credit card and debit card numbers were exploited. This cost tons of money from the banking institutions that had to deal with this exploit to Target itself dealing with the millions of dollars that they lost in sales as a result of this, not to mention a CEO's job. So this one, I find this one to be the scariest other than the air gap one. That was pretty freaking crazy, but CryptoLocker. So I had a coworker, actually a partner, let me just say, that got infected with this. So what happened was he received an email that said, here's your UPS tracking number for the recent shipment that you sent. Everybody's shipping out UPS stuff, right? So it makes sense. I'm going to go ahead and look in that. He opened the executable file, and then a day later, he got something that looked like this. So if this ever happens to you, let us know, right? Call your Hawaiian Telcom sales rep. So this is basically what you see when you've been exploited. And what that is basically is it is a ransomware program that what it does is once it infects you, it encrypts your hard drive, and then it lets you know that your hard drive's been encrypted, and then it'll tell you, hey, $300 and we'll give you back your hard drive. This affected 70 million, or 70% of the US became a victim of this, 25 million machines infected. So this guy is making hand over fist money, whoever wrote this program, and he's collecting it at $300 a pop. Anybody here willing to pay $300 to get their hard drive back? I sure as shooting are. I wouldn't hate to go to the IT department and go, hey, I get the stink eye big time, right? So literally, being able to mitigate these types of threats, huge challenge. So the traditional security defenses just don't work against this stuff. Okay, so now that I've got the lions and tigers and bears story out there, and you all are going to go turn off all your computers and unplug them from the internet, let's talk about what you can do to defend yourself, right? So let's talk about first, why does this stuff work? Why are these folks able to break into networks today? So let's talk a little bit about how a firewall works traditionally. So you're a user in the network. If somebody bad on the outside is trying to come in, the firewall will block them, right? No open session. But let's say you're a user. I want to go to the internet. I'm going to Target.com. I'm going to buy some stuff online. Target responds back. The firewall allows it. I created the session. I'm shopping Target. Well, even if you have intrusion prevention and all these cool controls in place, none of this stuff would protect you. The firewall doesn't protect you because you created the session. Intrusion prevention doesn't protect you because you created the session, and oftentimes intrusion prevention isn't looking for something built in a web page. Web filtering wouldn't protect you because you're going to Target, right? App control wouldn't protect you because you're using a web browser. Everybody uses a web browser. The only thing that protected you in this environment was threat intelligence and the ability to update these machines in a real-time fashion. Oh, I had to wrap it up light. Okay, I'm moving. So literally, you have to combine all these cool security controls with threat intelligence. Somebody's got to be watching the bad guys to make sure that you don't get broken into. So what we call that is FortiGuard, right? So when you buy a Fortinet, so you get MTSB, and it's installed at all of your offices. What is included with that is a FortiGuard subscription that updates all of the signature services on this box. So think about FortiGate as a security Swiss Army knife. It's got a blade for everything that you would need, all in one box, right? And so what happens in the FortiGuard Minute, this is interesting because this is real information. 52,000 different spam emails are intercepted in 1 minute. 43,000 network intrusion attacks resisted. 20,000 malware programs thwarted, right? 47,000 attempts to access malicious websites, so the websites like the NBC.com that's not really NBC.com. 65,000 botnet command and control sessions were blocked. So just so you know, botnets are controlled by IPv6 traffic, largely. Anybody running IPv6 in your network? You don't think so, right? You don't think so because your firewall doesn't see IPv6 traffic, but it still passes it. Every one of these machines has an IPv6 capability on it, every one of them. So literally, this is how the bad guys talk to their botnets, and we're blocking that stuff, right? So it's important to block that stuff. 14 million websites, so everything from hardporn.com to I-want-to-buy-a-machine-gun.com is being blocked by this capability. So having someone around the clock watching the threat environment and feeding threat intelligence to these devices and having that turn into actionable security is a critical part to securing your environment. All right, so how can you defend your organization? So for me, every nail a hammer. I think managed security services, everybody should be doing it. I wouldn't be trying to secure my environment myself, and I've been in the security business for 15 years. So this is what you see happening, is managed security service providers and solution service providers like Hawaiian Telcom are adding this threat intelligence capability onto the best in the business from a security perspective. So they're bringing best-in-breed security technology and including threat intelligence that's actionable. This is important because you couldn't necessarily keep up with this yourself, and if you did, we got a job for you, right? Because you're certainly not going to have any time to sell shoes or make lays, right? So literally, having other folks do this so that you don't have to deal with it migrates that security risk out of your network and into the hands of specialized operators. Unified threat management. One of the things to take into account is the multi-threat vectors that I talked about. Well, the stuff that's blocking the threats that are happening out there is not just antivirus or just web filtering. It's a combination of layered security approaches. Being able to use unified threat management basically combines all these security controls into one place and allows you to defend yourself against multiple threats and still get some sleep at night. You're not having to deal with the day-to-day issues of this. Another thing that is often misunderstood is authentication, right? So when you log into a machine, if your password is password1.com, whatever you have as a password and it's simple and easy, you're going to get broken into. Basically what these brute force attacks do is they just flood the credential system with all the most commonly used passwords, and somebody's going to fall victim to it. So dual factor authentication is a good idea. Education. I mean, we talked about the human factor, right? So that's a big part of the whole big picture, right? If it looks too good to be true, then it likely is. So I was a 32-year-old security kind of hot shot, right? And then somebody sent me Anna Kournikova pictures for free. Right? So I've been a victim too, but the fact of the matter is, if somebody's trying to give you Anna Kournikova pictures for free, don't click the link. So literally educating your users on how to use these things, oftentimes it's common sense. And it's funny because I'll talk to folks and they'll go, well, I didn't know what was in it, so I just clicked it to find out. What? If you don't know what's in it, don't click it to find out. It should be the opposite effect, right? So a lot of education around this, and it doesn't have to take a lot of time. Your folks at Hawaiian Telcom can assist with this in helping prepare your users for this new environment that's out there today. Okay, so here's my opportunity to shamelessly plug Fortinet and Hawaiian Telcom. Literally, what you're looking at on the left-hand side, this is what many businesses do today. They're dealing with the requirements to defend themselves against this stuff, and there's a lot of smart people in this room. You're probably familiar with this concept of having a bunch of different devices doing different things. That's all fine and good. That's what happened in the past. But really what's happening in the future is the ability to consolidate these security services into one high-performance device that gives you the ability to turn these things on an as-needed basis. Because if something breaks, an application doesn't work, and you've got this set up over here, you got to go look around to find out what's blocking or what's stopping that application. If a security exploit occurs, you got to find out where you dropped the ball or where your security dropped the ball. Not in this environment, right? So the unified threat management puts it all into one place and makes it easier to manage. Why would you want to do Fortinet, right? So anybody use Gartner to figure out what's what? Raise your hand if you look at Gartner at all. Gartner is a good place to look for technology companies, whether it's infrastructure as a service or what have you. Gartner pretty much rates everything from cars to security, right? And so we're on the top right side of the UTM Magic Quadrant. So what this means is that Gartner's done their due diligence on us, and they have for the past 12 years rated us as the #1 manufacturer for unified threat management. So what that means for you is your risk is low if you go with us. Anybody ever heard the phrase, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM? Very few people get fired for buying what's on the Gartner Magic Quadrant, so similar to that. And if you're in a compliance environment, one of the things that you would be concerned about is, well, how does this box rate for, say, FIPS or PCI? We meet all of the requirements for certifications, whether it's common criteria AEL 4+, which is basically the global security standard, or if it's FIPS 140 for the government, or if it's PCI. We meet all of those requirements, and we give you a single platform that does all the different things that you need to do. Where does anybody ever heard of Fortinet before? That's okay, I get that a lot, right? So we're like that company that does the BASF, we secure things, but nobody knows who we are. That's kind of us, right? But the fact of the matter is that we're #3 in the world for security. So we just pushed Juniper out of the way, and we're the #3 security manufacturer in the world, and we're closing on Check Point right now, and Cisco as well. So low risk to going in this direction. All of our big customers, right? So really appreciate everybody's attention here. Any other questions about the way that this can work in your network, talk to your Hawaiian Telcom rep. The solution is called MTSB, outstanding product, very cost effective, designed for all businesses. So right now I'd like to open it to a little bit of Q&A.
Is it true where now from your presentation that you don't have to install individual antivirus programs for all your computers on your network? Because you say 95%, it doesn't catch 95%, so why pay the money for it?
So literally on the FortiGate device itself, it'll run antivirus. So you can install it at the gateway. As a security guy, I believe in defense in depth. So even if it's 95% ineffective, maybe that 5%, I wouldn't do it. I don't. I have a FortiGate at my house and about 15 machines in there, and I don't have any antivirus running. I don't want to dissuade you from using antivirus and say that it's not something that you should do, but 95% ineffective.
So a lot of our customers are hospitals or small clinics. Would you recommend, they have to be HIPAA compliant, so would you recommend just having just a Fortinet as opposed to having more in-depth as far as semantic, AV, and so forth? So
they're the hackers again, man. They hate my presentation. Jeez. So HIPAA compliance is a pretty broad, it's everything from what they put on clipboards and what they truck around in a truck, right? So from a security perspective, the MTSB is a good solution for HIPAA compliance. And what happens in HIPAA is they'll come to you and ask what you're doing about HIPAA for the most part. And if you can say that you're using unified threat management and a managed security service, that's an excellent answer. Usually they'll go away. PCI is a little bit more sensitive, and sometimes they'll drop in on site and you'll get folks kind of fishing around your network. Again, being able to answer the fact that you're using unified threat management, which encompasses all these controls, and a managed security service, which is a bunch of really smart people doing it for us, is an excellent way to lay that issue. Great question.
So you block spam, right? That's one of the things.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we're with an organization that provides health services, and we have graduates of our programs. And one of the things I provide is to about maybe like 1,000 people updates on our information. And I'm finding I'm being blocked a lot because I'm considered spam. And these are people who, some of these people have my email address in their email address book. Is there something you can suggest on why I'm getting blocked, or how I can
So
get
you're
around
being
this?
blocked. You're being blocked because at some point in time you became a spam relay. So somebody broke into you and was using you to spam others. So that is a little bit bigger problem than, say, MTSB would be able to resolve. But basically, getting yourself off of the spam relay watch list is a good thing. That's what you need to do, because what they're doing is they're blocking you because you have shown a reputation for being a spammer. Again, probably a botnet, waking up at night and doing bad things with your computers. But that's generally the root of the problem.
Thank you.
You bet.
How do you have a suggestion on how I can get off this?
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about this afterwards if you like.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned that these viruses will come in through email attachments and whatever, and it gets in your BIOS. I do have a situation where a USB is in a computer and it's constantly having problems. What's the solution to getting that out of there, or just get a new machine? And you're talking about machine to machine talking to each other.
Right.
This is pretty hairy stuff for the average user who
Yeah.
has no clue what's going on.
So I'll tell you what the Defense Department did for this particular exploit, is they filled their USB ports with epoxy. Boom. It worked, right? So now what you're seeing is a lot of machines are being shipped without USB ports in really sensitive environments. Obviously, that's a pretty draconian measure. So you're in better shape by making sure that people don't use USB thumb drives in a haphazard fashion. What happened with the Defense Department is these folks kicking around in the war zone walked into the bathroom in the green zone, and there's all these USB sticks laying around. He's like, oh, cool, free USB stick. Iranian, yeah. So epoxy. I wish I had a better answer for you, but the hardware stuff is difficult, and especially that bad BIOS is a challenge. So I would restrict the use of USB ports if at all possible.
Any other questions? I have one from the audience that I would like to read. How does Unified Threat Management compare to NGFW?
Good question. Excellent question. So you'll hear a lot of marketing hoo-ha about next generation firewall, or NGFW. And what does that mean? Well, if you leave marketing folks alone in a room for too long, they'll come up with something like this. And the fact of the matter is, next generation firewall is a subset of the controls that you get in Unified Threat Management. So NGFW is firewall, intrusion prevention, and web filtering. So Unified Threat Management is that and about 5 or 6 other things. So if you're looking at NGFW and comparing it to Unified Threat Management, you're basically getting less with the next generation firewall. Good question.
Just a comment on the South Korean hard drive wiping. There's been some indication that those systems had a persistent infection on them before the wiping, and the wiping may have just been the perpetrator deciding, okay, I got enough information, I'm erasing my tracks.
That's often being used as a way to cover their tracks. They don't want to have you discover what happened. And the guy that discovered the bad BIOS exploit, they were trying to do that. Literally, they were erasing data. As soon as he started doing things and he started going into the registry and doing certain things, they tried to wipe out his hard drive. So that's an excellent point. That's most likely what's happening. Sir?
Just a clarification. If you want to use Fortinet in an SMB situation, that would be an appliance you would install on site?
Correct.
And if you're in a hosted situation, say with Hawaiian Tel, then we use that, what is it,
MTSB.
Yeah, is that the differentiation there?
So that would be a different product. We're working on that. So basically, you'll be able to get that in a cloud version of MTSB, maybe vMTSB or something to that effect.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Okay, I'm a computer consultant on Maui, and I can certainly attest to Fortinet's way of doing UTM, and you can alleviate a lot of stress on the individual workstations by having less software. I often see users are installing so much stuff on the computer that you just get these nice computers that runs really fast, but then you bog them down with all this software. So your solution obviously makes a whole different scenario, and you can actually get to use your computers again. One question comes to mind in terms of managing the stations, though. Do your solution have some client software that would help on making policies like disabling USB ports, or is there any clients software?
So we have the Forti client. So anything that we make has got a Forti on the front end of it. So Forti this, Forti that. FortiClient is the technology that would be installed on the actual machine itself. But you can, with MTSB, you can activate application control. And what application control does is disallows them from downloading and installing applications. So BitTorrent, Kazaa, you know, Farmville within Facebook. So application control is a huge part of that security infrastructure. So one of the things that I suggest to businesses that are getting MTSB, we have a ton of stuff that we can do. You don't want to do everything on there, right? Really, IPS, app control, and web filtering are the big ones that'll stop the majority of the threats that you saw. But app control would stop them from downloading all the goofy stuff that creates performance issues on the boxes.
Sorry, you just mentioned that you had the the client version. So does it integrate fully with Active Directory?
Yes.
So if I have some policies defined in AD, it won't conflict with the client?
Generally, that's done with the firewall itself. You integrate the directory structure with the firewall, but you can do it on the FortiClient as well.
Okay.
You bet.
You were mentioning your Androids and your smartphones and viruses coming in through the Google Play and those apps that you might download on your phone. Will the Fortinet be able to link your Android and protect your Android too, or at least check it?
Great question.
The thing that I find is that when I take a lot of pictures and things like that on my cell phone and then I download it into my computer, am I actually transmitting some more viruses coming in there? Or, this is scary stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And that's the big problem with the mobile malware threats that are occurring today is they are actually designed to be plugged in to a machine and then use that machine to create a denial of service type of condition. So BYOD, or bring your own device, is a big issue for businesses today. And literally what you gain with MTSB is you integrate wireless, the Wi-Fi into the firewall. So whenever you do connect with that mobile device in your environment, you're able to defend that device. I would suggest something like a Lookout, some sort of software that you can download on Google Play to defend the device whenever you're actually out and about, right? So when you bring it in and you attach it to Wi-Fi, MTSB will defend that. But as soon as you're out in the wild, it's good to have something like a Lookout Pro that's making sure that applications you download are not containing malicious code. Awesome. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you all spending time today.